for me?
The cells are downstairs.
This here is your end of a good deal.
me loose! What are you doing? Untie me, damn it! Jackass. Jesus Christ! Son of a bitch! Damn you to hell!
There goes my
Hey!
I sure hope this ain't one for talking, because I ain't in the mood. Here, don't be a stranger.
Yeah.
Real fine horse. Meal is complete if it don't got meat. Yeah. Come on now, get moving, will you? bitch!
Let me tell you something. Y'all getting too crazy with y'all kids with these goddamn phones. The robbers watching now. See, the streets all messed up and they looking for money and they'll tear your kid up by that check. A 12th grader was starting a little too high. You see this nigga? Look at this nigga doing all this shit. He coming out like the car, throwing money. Look at this shit. Who raised this nigga? Who raised you, boy? Look at this shit. But see, the robbers saw this shit, man, and they ain't like that. So they followed him home and hit his young ass up. The team right now is currently in intensive care but in stable condition. He sustained non-life-threatening injuries due to his gunshot wound. Now, being that he got shot, he wasn't able to walk across that stage today to get his goddamn diploma, but his mama walked across for him and got his diploma on graduation day because he in the hospital right now with gunshot wounds. Y'all parents be going a little too goddamn hard on these kids' prom, man. Why the hell little Bam Bam, little Ray Ray, and little Pookie Face fell in his school, but he landed a helicopter in front of the goddamn prom on prom night? Why the hell y'all got little young
When I arrived at the gas station for my first shift, the place looked quite normal. It was one of those standalone branded gas stations, named a generic Star Gasoline, and clearly family owned. It was a bit run down but serviceable, and only one car was currently pumping gas. The gas tanks were lit by a single yellow light that hung in the center, casting shadows in all four directions, like a compass dial. The actual convenience store part of the gas station was typical. The glass windows were plastered with sun-bleached advertisements for cigarettes, energy drinks, and a 2 hot dogs for 99 cents deal. The tinkle of the bell chimed when I pushed open the convenience store door, and I was met with the smell of slightly old hot dogs that had been sitting under a heat lamp all day. Looking over, I saw that there was no one at the counter, but a lady who looked like she was in her 50s waved at me from the back of the store as she was sweeping up. The store was a little larger than a typical gas station convenience store. The interior is what you would expect, except for one thing. There was a clock and an old TV screen lined up on each side of the room, showing security camera footage of the gas pumps. It seemed unnecessary. And in addition, the owners didn't aim these security cameras very well, and it was mostly casting footage of the ground in between the gas pumps and the store instead of centering the gas pumps in the middle. "Oh, hello, you must be Alex." I was taken out of my thoughts and I looked forward. "I know that my husband originally interviewed you. We've been trying to find a person to do this night shift for months, and I dare say I'm getting too old to stay up that late. But you're young, so you'll be fine." She wiped her hands on her pants before reaching out her hand to shake mine. "I'm Anne. Nice to meet you. You can go ahead and set your things behind the counter, and I'll show you around real quick. I know you've already worked at a gas station before, so I won't bore you. We just needed someone who was good at following directions." The little lady moved quickly for someone her size. She seemed eager to get me started so that she could finally go home and enjoy a normal sleep schedule. "The cleaning supplies are back here in this closet. Mops and brooms are hung on the left. Bathroom is on the right. It's just a single toilet room." I peeked inside. The bathroom was just about what I expected a gas station bathroom to look like. The walls were all scratched up from druggies probably sketching their initials all over it, and the tiles had a nasty brown stain from years of use. But it smelled clean at least, like bleach. And there was hand soap, which wasn't always a guarantee whenever I used a gas station bathroom. I'll give you a list later with the cleaning tasks and when to do it, since you'll be closing up. Finally, she led me back to the front, showed me how to use the cash register and the debit card machine, and we were just about done. She dug into her pocket and pulled out a pair of keys. "These are the keys to lock up, one for the front and one for the back door. Near your chair at the register, there is a yellow list of the cleaning tasks. The most important one is the red sheet." She pointed at the bright red paper sitting next to the register. "Read that and learn it by heart, and you'll have no problems." "Thanks, I'll take a read." "Did you bring a good watch like I told you to?" Yes, I did. Though it looks like you have so many clocks in here, I feel like I don't really need this watch to tell the time. Oh no, you'll definitely need it. Trust me. You've got another, 15 minutes before your shift starts. Go sit down and start on some of those tasks, and keep it with you for a few days. You'll know it by heart soon enough. I don't need it anymore. I learned quick. She picked up her bags from behind the counter and left. There were no customers anymore, and it was relatively quiet. It was almost 10 p.m. and by now, there weren't even any cars passing by on the road outside in this small town. I gazed outside again at the lone gas station light, flickering occasionally in the distance. The light illuminated long, stretching shadows of the gas pumps. All 4 shadows were cast in the same direction towards the convenience store, almost like they were crawling towards the building in parallel. I picked up the 2 instruction sheets. Both were laminated and printed on steady cardstock and a little grimy from use, probably because many employees had to refer to them often. The yellow sheet didn't seem all that interesting. Just a lot of mundane tasks like mopping up and taking out the trash at the end of the night. The red sheet, however, had blocks of text on it. Welcome to Star Gas Station. This is your night shift employee manual. Please follow all instructions with great care. It is important that you are punctual and uphold the quality of service that our customers expect, even during the late night hours. We strive for peace and harmony with our neighbors, night and day. 1. A clean store with busy employees is a happy and occupied store. 2. Spend most of your time being active in the lit part of the store, except when otherwise necessary. Half of the lights are always off. 3. Before 10 p.m., turn off half of the store lights. It does not matter which half of the store that you keep lit, but whatever you choose, keep it for the rest of the night. If you turn off all the lights, it makes the store look closed. You would need the unlit part of the store later. 4. If you need to use the bathroom, keep the door cracked so that you can keep an eye on the security footage on the TV monitors. 5. Throughout the night, you might notice puddles of water and heavy dust on the floor and table surfaces in various places. Try to clean them up when you can, using the provided mops and dusters. Puddles and dust make the store look abandoned and unkept and will attract attention. A clean store is a happy, occupied store. We recommend occasionally patrolling the store to look for water or dust that you might miss. Remember to check the employee's break room. 6. Around 12 a.m. or earlier, prepare the mop bucket with water and soap. At 12:05, go to the back of the store to the refrigerated drinks aisle and mop the aisle continuously until 12:25. Do not leave this aisle or stop mopping until the specified time for any reason. You may feel something watching you and a strong desire to leave the aisle and hide. Do not listen to this urge. Act normal and do not show signs of fear. You may go back and forth down the aisle until time is up. Management recommends keeping your head down, keeping an eye on your watch, and wearing some headphones with music to help you block out sound. The quality of your mopping does not matter, but it is important that you appear busy at work. 7. On the walls next to the cash register is a camera feed of the backlot that is different from the other camera feeds. You do not need to check this feed too frequently, only once every 30 minutes at the top and bottom of the hour. At any time of the night, if you see a shadowy figure standing in front of the camera feed and staring directly at you into the camera, calmly and slowly duck down under the register so that you are no longer able to see this particular monitor screen. We call him Fred. Wait 5 minutes and use the provided compact mirror, it's underneath the cash register, to indirectly check if Fred is still there. If he's still there, continue checking every 5 minutes until he leaves. 8. And this one only happens if you were not acting busy enough or if the store is dirty. You may see Fred standing directly looking at you at the front of the convenience store. If so, stop what you are doing and do not acknowledge his presence, but calmly crouch behind any of the aisles in the unlit section and make noise by reorganizing and moving snack bags and drinks around. Do not stand up again. You want him to hear you, not see you. He will not want to bother you if you seem busy. You can peek through the shelves to see if he is still there, but be careful. 9. Finally, these are the most important rules. We usually only have one local neighbor, Fred, visit every night. But on a very rare, unlucky occasion, there are more of them. Unfortunately, only Fred is relatively harmless as long as you follow the rules. The other foreign visitors are not. There are multiple TV monitors on the walls of the store. If at any time in the parking lot you see the four shadows of the gas pump all face towards you in the same direction, this is a bad omen. It means that out-of-town visitors are nearby, and it is best to vacate. 10. You will have a few minutes. Drop what you are doing, run to the employee back room, and find a large light switch panel on the back wall. Turn off every switch to turn off all electricity to the store. It'll make the store look closed and the visitors may leave to look for a different establishment. This angers Fred, who is a local, but helps discourage out-of-town visitors from coming in. Go into the storage room on the right, lock the door and deadbolt it. Put your phone on silent and send Anne a text. Do not try to leave. Multiple visitors may enter the store. Fred will also get inside now that the store seems closed, but he should not find you if you remain still. You can take a nap for the rest of the night, as long as you do not snore. If all goes well, we will collect you in the morning and pay you triple your wages for the trouble. Ice ran through my fingers as I reread one line that stood out. In a panic, I looked up at the closest monitor, and the shadows were so elongated that they were basically leaking into the store. But there were no shadowy figures inside. Yet. I was starting to shake. No way that this list is real. But I clearly remembered the shadows being in a compass formation when I first arrived. The sun was already down, and unless that singular light fixture could somehow move positions, there's no way to explain the shadows suddenly changing to stand parallel to one another. Blood was draining from my face and I looked up at the clock. It had taken me a while to read through the list, but maybe I had a minute left. Break room, back wall, panel, storage room, lock it and deadbolt, call Anne, and then stay silent. I sprinted from behind the counter and I ran to the back room. I quickly located the light panel and smashed my hands down on all the switches and blacked out the store. My hand fumbled for my phone flashlight while I grasped the walls to find the storage room door and I pulled myself in. I couldn't see a thing except for the narrow beam of my phone flashlight, but I managed to lock and deadbolt the door with my jittery fingers, and then located boxes that I could hide behind. My heart was pounding. I wasn't sure if all of this was a joke, but it couldn't hurt to call Anne and ask her what in the world was going on. I dialed her number, and I heard the dial tone of the phone call trying to get through. I hope she picks up. It seemed to take forever. Hello? I couldn't believe she actually picked up. I immediately asked her if that red instruction sheet was real. In a slurry of panicked words, I also explained the shadows that all began facing the same direction towards the store, and demanded to know if I was in actual danger. Oh, sorry that I didn't tell you, honey. That last one almost never happens. It's only happened a couple of times in the past 2 years. You just got really unlucky. It seems like you did almost everything right, though. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just stay inside and stay quiet. We'll get you in the morning, sweetie. I was still in a panic, but this reassurance relaxed me enough to slump down the wall and get ready to settle in for the night. However, just as I was about to put the phone down, a thought bubbled up in my head. Did she say that I did almost everything right? I felt something next to me. The voice was now no longer coming from my cell phone, but right next to my ear.
You're supposed
That wasn't me on the phone. I felt my face drain white. I asked her how it was possible. That phone call I made while being in the storage room sounded so real. I even heard a dial tone. I know it sounds crazy, hon. Don't look at me like that. Sit down. Anne sat me down and I spilled a slew of questions at her, but she didn't answer everything. According to her, shadowy entities like Fred can mimic voices and sounds that they've heard. She said that's why one of the rules about mopping the drinks aisle at 12:05 recommended music with headphones. And when she's done it, sometimes she would hear what sounded like her husband calling her name from the parking lot, or her son knocking on the back door saying that he needed to get in. But her husband knows not to come at night, and her son doesn't even live in this town anymore. Another time when she was on the night shift, it sounded like her cell phone was ringing in her pockets while she was in the middle of mopping. Out of habit, she absent-mindedly picked it up, but then a realization and dread filled her. Her phone is always on silent, so it couldn't have been ringing. She never made that mistake again. Anne apologized for not being clearer about the job details. She said that after seeing and doing this job for so many years, she took the little details for granted and didn't consider that a new person would know the little tidbits and tips that she had picked up from experience. I didn't accept her apology, and that last part seemed like an excuse. She and her husband deliberately left out these details on the job description. My mind flashed back to when I got the job, and I thought that it was odd that Anne's husband only phone interviewed me and didn't seem to want to meet in person before giving me the offer. At the time, I just chalked it up to desperation. I would have left and never come back if it weren't for my curiosity. I really wanted to know if all of this was real, or if I had the craziest mental trip in the world without having done any drugs. Anne told me she's had a few employees who stuck around over the 20 years that she and her husband owned the gas station. She usually tried to get town locals. They were acquainted with the strange supernatural occurrences around them. They don't happen to everyone, but some. However, as the residents grew older, and many of their children skipped town and moved elsewhere as soon as they could, I asked Anne why she and her husband don't just skip town and move elsewhere. Or why not just close the gas station before nightfall and avoid the whole night charades altogether? She said that she couldn't. Her husband inherited this gas station from his own father. It's an old town, and all of the original buildings experience odd events when they deviate too much from how they were 50 years ago. Because this gas station was originally a stay-open-late gas station for trucks that passed through town at night, something wanted it to stay that way. Her husband had younger siblings, but in order for them to be able to leave town and live normal lives, someone had to take the role of owning the family gas station, and it landed on him as the eldest. Once her husband did try to abandon and shut down the gas station, but misfortunes and near-death freak accidents started to happen around the family. When he reopened and restored the normal working hours of the gas station, it stopped. The big question you guys probably want to know is, how am I still here to type this report up to you? I have no memory whatsoever after hearing Fred speak into my ear in that storage room, and then I woke up lying face up in the employee break room. Light streamed from the front of the store, and I realized that it was daylight. Long story short, I didn't die that night in the gas station, but that's not the case for my predecessors in this job, apparently. Anne says others have mysteriously disappeared during their shifts before, presumably because they made a mistake. Anne doesn't know if they died or if something else had happened to them. Anne and her husband reckon that it had let them off easy. It had let off another employee easy before, but it took his leg. Like it took his leg clean off. He technically lived through the encounter, but died from bleeding out in the middle of the night while blacked out. Obviously, both Anne and her husband have survived making mistakes more than once. Probably because they inherited the gas station and they were needed to run it. I wasn't sure whether to believe them. I tried asking for the names of the previous employees, but Anne refused, citing privacies for the families affected. She can't stop me from Googling missing person reports, though. I'm sure in such a small town, it would be all over the newspapers and town talk. However, I should tell you all that I didn't survive completely unscathed. The ear where I heard Fred speak was now deaf. Even though she was being somewhat uncooperative and a little sketchy, as she did look at me with concern when she realized that I became deaf in one ear as a result of working that shift. She divulged that the reason that she worked the night shift these past years was because her husband had gone completely blind. He had accidentally fallen asleep while working the night shift, and he woke up the next morning, shaken up by Anne. It was a bright and sunny day, but he asked her why the lights were still off. Anne herself was getting older, and she was worried that she would fall asleep one day too. She needed a replacement, and perhaps that's why I lived instead of suffering a mysterious disappearance. I'm not sure if that was truth or a threat. Next, I wanted to know who or what the heck Fred was. Anne shook her head and told me that it was a story for another day. Not now. You're tired from the shock. Go home and get rest. I refused, and I asked her about Fred again, demanding my right to know what almost killed me. Shaking her head vigorously, she started to shoo me outside the door of the gas station, saying, I'll tell you another time. You can have the rest of the week off, but I need you back on Monday. What? Monday? This lady thinks that I'll come back. Before I could shove my way back inside the store, Anne quickly locked it to keep me from pestering her, and despite it still being opening hours. As she walked away and ignored me, I commented under my breath that Fred wouldn't like that she locked the door. Fine. Bewildered and my head swimming with more questions than answers, I turned to go back to my car and head home. I got my left ear checked by the doctor, and she told me the eardrum had blown out and was not repairable. I might recover slight hearing, but I wouldn't get full functionality back, ever. Since then, I tried to apply to many different other local jobs after that because I was determined not to come back. There was no way I was ever coming back because that gas station is crazy and it's not worth dying over. But for some reason, whenever I visited businesses to apply to in person, I kept getting turned down immediately. They would say that I'm not fit for the job, despite being well qualified. They would say that the job was already taken or filled up, which made me skeptical. I mean, for a couple of those jobs, the opening was posted that day. I also pursued some job ads and sent an email with my resume. But almost right away, I got multiple message not delivered, bounce back or errors that said the email recipient did not exist or was unreachable. Had I misspelled the email address somehow? I got a friend of mine from another city to apply to the same jobs and reply to the same emails, but his went through just fine. And then he tried to apply to things on my behalf using my resume, but he would get turned down right away, inexplicably. It didn't take long for me to put two and two together. Something wanted me to stay. The past few nights confirmed it. It started the first night the day after the gas station incident. My bedroom clock showed 10:30 p.m., and I was standing in front of my mirrored closet door. And that was when I saw it. A shadowy silhouette was barely visible through my opaque curtains. The edges weren't solid like a real person, backlit by these streetlights outside. It was blurred and the whole figure was almost see-through. It wasn't moving, but it was facing towards me. I froze. I live in a nearby small town. This was not the same town that Ant's gas station was in. Something followed me home. I froze too long because after 10 seconds, suddenly the light turned off in my room. You could hear a pin drop in the silence after that. I dared not turn around, and I felt the sensation of ice crawling across my scalp. I blinked and the silhouette was bigger, like it had gotten closer. If it had a face, it would be right up against my window. Against all of my senses screaming at me not to move, I forced my frozen muscles to jerk awake, and I ran into the bathroom connected to my bedroom, and I made a noisy show of washing my face, splashing water, and brushing my teeth as if I were getting ready for bed. In a frenzy, I knocked over my ceramic toothbrush holder and shattered it on the floor with a loud crack. Dread coursed through me, and I was afraid that I would die any second now. I hoped that I had made the right decision. However, death did not come for me. Not yet. As I noisily brushed my teeth and splashed water around in the sink, I gradually felt the sensation of icy dread leave me, but I kept up the charade for a few more minutes. Eventually, a sense of aloneness washed over me, and I wondered if the presence had left me alone. I cautiously used my phone camera to check the bedroom window. The figure was gone. I went to bed, but I did not sleep much that night. Ever since that first night, the figure has revisited me every night, watching me through the curtains. I thought about getting blacker curtains to completely block it out, but I feared not being able to see it approaching and being attacked unaware. So I decided against it, even if it was creepy and gave me a heart attack every night. I eventually figured out that if I went to bed and held still, as if asleep before 10 p.m., it would come check in on me and leave without incident. However, as the days grew closer to the coming Monday when I supposedly have to return to work at the gas station, I had been getting in increasing amounts of bad luck every day. My car won't start. Things oddly misplaced. I lost my keys and then found them, later thrown in some bushes. The last straw was when my apartment's front door suddenly stuck in an unlocked position, despite being in fine working condition. Remembering that the gas station's red sheet had said to deadbolt the door when being pursued by the shadowy figures, I didn't take any chances, and I bought a cheap deadbolt and affixed it to my door. I'm going to go back to the gas station on Monday for one shift. I want to get all this freaky stuff to stop. I haven't been eating well because of the constant, crushing pressure of fear and anxiousness that something is going to happen to me any second now. If you have any suggestions, please let me know, or any suggestions on how to perform a Monday shift perfectly. I feel like there's too many things to keep track of, but I guess if Anne and her husband learned to do it nearly every night for years, I could too. Until then, I'm just reminding myself to act natural. Don't be afraid. I am a normal and good citizen. I will go back to work. A busy citizen is a good citizen. I've been a security guard in my company for over 2 years now, but the work that my company does is not your typical run-of-the-mill. To put it simply, my company accepts jobs which no other security company will. That includes high-risk assignments which often result in loss of staff members or abandoning their post. Let me take it from the top. When I started working here, they had a very long one-on-one with me to explain all the potential dangers that I would be facing. They also made me sign an NDA and a bunch of other papers which stated that if something were to happen to me, the company would not be held responsible. They explained that the job is risky, but also paid well. I had been jobless for a while and jumped at the opportunity regardless of the risk. Unlike most other companies, though, they made me read through the entire NDA aloud and made sure that I was aware of all the rules. Some of the things that I read there made me think initially that this was all a joke, But then I saw that my superior was really serious. My job would basically be to provide support to the guards at other posts via comms and patrol the perimeter that I was stationed at. Now, our HQ was located in an office building compound which had multiple companies renting the adjacent buildings. I would mostly work nights with the occasional morning, and the rules were as follows. I was to do a full sweep of the compound in all offices, save for Building 4, the call center office. I was not to approach Building 4 under any circumstances, no matter what I heard from the outside. Even if I saw someone inside from the windows, I was not to engage. When I asked for more details, they refused to answer me, stating that I should simply obey their orders if I value my life. Now, people have a normal 9-to-5 job in that building, and nothing seems to be wrong during the daytime. When I do ask the employees about during my morning shifts, though, they all seem to either not know anything or abruptly find an excuse to end the conversation. For Building 6, the designer company, the rules were even stranger. Here's what the chief told me. In Building 6, you may sometimes run into someone, a woman to be precise. She's going to try to start a conversation with you. It is imperative that you ignore her presence at all costs. She will try to talk to you, taunt you, but she will never get in your way. An extremely important rule to remember, and I cannot stress this enough, is that if you see her in the building, don't run or exit the building before finishing your sweep. Trust me, she'll know. Do the sweep as you normally would. Check every room and then quietly exit, ignoring her all the way. She will become increasingly agitated and violent, and might even try to startle you, tell you that there's something behind you in a very convincing manner. Just ignore her. If you don't, well, you don't want to know what happened to the last guard. I've since encountered the woman once, and it was a grueling and agonizing experience that I would rather not talk about. Another rule that I had to remember was not opening the gate between the hours of 22 and 07. The chief said that under no circumstances I might open the gate, even if the next guard comes 5 minutes earlier to relieve me of my duty. The gate was to remain closed. And that brings me to the experience that I had once. It was about 6 months after I started working, and the sun was already almost up. I heard knocking on the gate, and when I went out, I saw through the gate the silhouette of my coworker. "Hey, mind opening the gate?" he had asked. As I approached and put my keys into the keyhole, my phone started ringing. I answered it without even looking at the caller. But when I heard the voice, my blood froze. It was my coworker. "Hey, I'm gonna be about 30 minutes late today. Sorry, man." I hung up and then realized that it was 6:50 a.m. I stared at the silhouette on the other side of the gate, who suddenly started banging on the door, demanding to be let in, stating that he had lost his cell phone and that he was the real coworker. I retreated to the guardhouse and waited for what seemed like forever until the banging stopped. In reality, it only lasted until 7 a.m. Those were all the rules that I had to follow on my own post, and most of the time, it's uneventful. However, I've heard stories from other coworkers. Since I'm in contact with guards at other posts, one of them told me this story. He had worked as a guard in a residential building, and one night, an old man who lived there called him to come to his apartment. He didn't explain what was wrong, just told him to go there, and so he did. When he had reached the apartment, the wife of the old man was crying, stating that her husband was dead. The guard tried convincing her that her man was very much alive and had in fact brought him there. But when he turned around, the old man was gone. It was then that he saw the old man's body in his chair next to his sobbing wife. He quit the same night. Another creepy thing that happened was on a farmstead which our company has guards posted on. A guy by the name of Jeff who worked there told me about his own experience, which made him run away from his post in the middle of the night. So apparently the farm was empty at that time since it needed some more stuff built first. But his duty was to basically patrol circles around the farm and make sure that there were no squatters or vandals. So one night, as he's walking around, he hears someone calling his name in a playful tone. He dismisses it as his imagination at first, but when it recurs, he asks who's there and demands they show up with their hands in the air. Now, I haven't seen this, so I can't guarantee anything, but Jeff swears that it's true. He says all of a sudden, out of the crops, a man just stands up. At the top of the crops, reached to his waist, which was technically impossible, because the crops themselves were taller than Jeff, and he's a pretty tall guy. But the man grins at Jeff and continues calling his name playfully, as if he's still hiding from him. Needless to say, Jeff didn't stick around to see what that guy wanted. When he reported it to HQ, they said that there were sightings of that man in the past, always calling the names of the guards but never really doing anything harmful. The final thing that I'll share with you here is my experience when I was stationed at a hospital for 1 month. It was a private clinic of some sorts, and my job was to basically monitor the camera feed. Camera 3 was off though, and when I asked why, they told me to keep it that way and never turn it on. They also said that from time to time I may see a person on the feed which covered the outside of the security office, and that he would just be standing there, facing the door. I was to remain in my office when that happened and not glance at the door. He would usually disappear after about 30 minutes or so, and patrolling was strictly prohibited between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Money is one of the reasons why I haven't quit so far, and the dangers aren't that bad once you get used to them and you know what you're doing. And plus, getting stationed at different posts keeps the job adventurous and dynamic. If any of you lack any special talents or qualifications like me, this job is perfect for you. So, a lot of you are asking to hear more about my job and the duties that come along with it. I'll be sharing in this post more about the stories that I have and what I heard from the other guards. I know you wanted to know more about the woman in building number 6, so I'll be sharing my experience with that first. This happened about a year ago, but I still dread going back to the building every time during my patrol. I was doing a sweep of the building using my flashlight to illuminate my path. As I was done checking one of the offices, I turned around, and my heart nearly popped out of my chest at what the beam of my flashlight had landed on. It was a woman in her late 20s, with unkempt hair and raggedy clothing. She was just standing there, staring at me, not even flinching at the light in her face. I was about to talk to her, thinking she was a squatter, completely forgetting about the rules since I had never once encountered her by then. And then, when I remembered the rules, that I was supposed to ignore her, my heart started to thump fast. I lowered my flashlight to my waist, pretending that I was looking at something in the wall to prevent her from seeing my beam bouncing up and down from my trembling hand. I remembered that I had to do a full sweep before leaving if she was here, and I was only done with 1 floor. So at the thought of this, I cursed in my mind. Hey, I'm sorry, I think I fell asleep in one of the offices and stayed after closing, she said, but I ignored her. I pretended to look around some more, but knew that I could only do it for so long before she got suspicious. So I decided to test my luck and just went for the door. As soon as I was inches close to her, she stepped aside and let me move along. I strode to the next office, but heard her following me right behind me. Hey, can you please let me out? My children have to be worried sick, she repeated. The next 15 minutes or so, she was breathing down my neck, constantly trying to grab my attention. As I entered one of the offices, she pointed to the corner opposite of where my beam was and said, "Hey, who's that over there?" I fought the urge to look there, knowing that she was lying, but half scared that someone would just jump me right around the corner. As I progressed with my sweep, she became increasingly irritated, throwing stuff in my direction, not at me, mind you, but trying to startle me, but throwing them right in front of my face. Suddenly jumping in my walking path with a loud scream before moving aside again, clasping her hands over her mouth and pointing behind me with wide eyes, which screamed utter fear. Even saying things like, "I know you can see me, and I know I'm here. I can see how scared you are." I ignored all of it as much as I could, and by the time I was back on the first floor, more than ready to get out, she was saying things like, "Are you sure you checked all the rooms?" giggling along the way. I put the key in the keyhole and everything went quiet. I didn't want to see if she was gone, but instead I just went out as calmly as I could and locked the door behind me. I couldn't sleep for weeks after that one. A few months ago, I was stationed at an old office building. At first it seemed like a common job, but I knew there was a catch before I even signed up. Sure enough, I was right. My partner and I were stationed on floor 43, which was undergoing renovations. Our job was to simply stand in front of a door. The door had a card reader and we were given access, but we were strictly forbidden from entering. People in hazmat suits would be coming in and out all day long from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we were to let them in and out whenever they pleased, keeping track of the number of people who came and went. Now the catch was, after 1,600 hours, we were ordered not to let anyone in or out. That meant even if someone knocked on the door at 16:01, we would ignore them entirely. But there would always be at least 3 people who would try to leave the room after 1,600 hours, always asking politely and then becoming increasingly desperate, saying that they had simply lost track of time and they would plead with us, saying that their family was waiting for them at home. We always ignored their crying and pleading, no matter how desperate it was, until it turned into whimpers and then finally stopped. Now, I've only seen the room from the door and from what I could see, it was just a normal room undergoing renovation like the rest of the floor. So whatever was in there must have been deeper inside or hidden in plain sight. As for the numbers that we tracked, the number of people who got out by the end of the day was always lower than the number of people who went in. In one story, a guard named Chris told me about his time in an old mansion guarding a big mirror. He and his co-worker were in the security room patrolling every hour, especially making sure that the mirror was covered with a sheet. They were to, under no circumstances, look at the mirror. They had a camera feed of the mirror which was on the bottom floor under the stairs, but it was turned so that the reflective side faced away from the camera. This one night, Chris's co-worker goes for a patrol, and as he enters the mirror room, suddenly the sheet just slides off. Now the guy who told me this said it was technically impossible for the sheet to just come off, because it was fastened tightly. But somehow it did, and his partner just finds himself staring at the mirror. And Chris locks the security room, as per the instructions from HQ, and calls the intervention team. Meanwhile, he glances back at the camera feed, only to find his co-worker still staring blankly in the mirror. He had thought the camera was frozen, but the timer was moving, so his partner was just very still. He tried radioing him, but there was no response. And after about a minute or so, all of a sudden his partner pulls out his gun, puts it into his mouth, and finishes the job. And Chris was transferred the next day since a special team was sent to secure the mirror, and his services were no longer needed. One position that everyone is massively trying to apply for is the surveillance officer in a small town close to my own. Why they want the position is what I'll get to in a bit. But basically, the camera feed and the monitors in HQ over there cover various private households. One of the households is said to have a man in a suit show up at the doorstep from time to time. Now usually, guards need to go out to the address and make sure that everything is okay, or to apprehend the intruder. But for this specific individual, HQ left a very unique guide. Here are the instructions left by HQ. If the security official notices an individual in business attire on camera 12 during a shift, the steps below must be followed when confronting the individual. 1. Approach the individual and wait for him to turn around. He will continue to smile for the entirety of the conversation, but should his expression change, disengage and run to safety as quickly as possible. Be advised that while firearms are not prohibited, they are highly ineffective against the individual. Do not turn or look away from the individual once he is turned around, unless you need to evacuate. 2. The individual will, after turning around, inquire, "Lovely night, isn't it?" If the individual has not yet asked this question, follow the previous step and evacuate. 3. If the individual has inquired the aforementioned question, respond with, "Yes it is, what can I do for you?" Or, "Indeed it is, how can I help you?" A combination of both works as well. If the individual ceases to smile during this interaction, proceed to evacuate immediately. 4. If done correctly, the individual will now ask, "Can you sing me a song?" If he says anything else, evacuate. 5. From here, you are to sing the pre-taught song to the individual, while ignoring his taunts and distractions. If so much as one word, pause or tone or stress are missed, evacuate. If the individual stops smiling during the song, evacuate. 6. If done correctly, the individual will say, "Splendid, thank you for the beautiful song." If he says anything aside from that, evacuate. 7. If step 6 was done correctly, close your eyes for at least 10 seconds and then open them. On the front steps where the individual stood will now be a briefcase containing a large sum of money, while the individual himself will be gone and the household safe. 8. On the way back, the security official may encounter people of various ages in dire need of help. Most common occurrences include starving women with newborn babies, lost children, an attractive young woman hitchhiking, etc. They are to be ignored and not offered assistance under any circumstances. 9. Return to post and turn off camera 12. Note: the company does not claim the reward from the individual. Therefore, the security official is free to keep it. The high-risk, high-reward position makes it attractive to many people, but most of them never live to tell the tale. I was also told that the candidates go through rigorous training, focusing primarily on sprinting. The candidates also need to pass the test, which simulates the encounter with the businessman, no less than 5 times with a 95% or higher score. They are forced to remember the song perfectly, going through a computerized scanner which detects any notes which were off. I don't even know what the song is, but I was told it's a simple tune which sounds like something taught in preschool. Anyway, this is as far as I'll go on this post, but I have some more stories to share in my future updates. In the meantime, stay safe and try to stay away from these kinds of things. They sound attractive due to pay or rush some people thrive on, but a tiny mistake can cost you your life, or worse. Here are some more stories about places that I was stationed at and the ones that I heard from other guards in the company. A lot of these guards aren't around anymore, and I reckon the same could happen to me at any moment in my shift. So, if in case there's a lack of updates, most likely something's happened to me. So, one memorable experience that I've had, not in a good way, was when I was stationed at a local park with another guard. The park wasn't too big. Had a playground, a running track which wound in a circle around the park itself, and a tennis court. Everywhere else around were thick trees, so following the running track gave a very convincing impression of being in a forest, away from civilization. My coworker and I were to start our shift in the park at 7 p.m. and it would end at 7 a.m. There was a tiny guardhouse near the entrance which we could spend most of our shift in, and every 2 hours we would do a patrolman around the park, very strictly following the running track where the path was illuminated. We were given a heavy-duty flashlight and a backup torch in case the main one runs out of power. HQ issued an order that if we found any burnt-out light on our path, we were to retreat to the guardhouse immediately and let maintenance know about it in the morning. Under no circumstances were we to step into the dark patch of the track. This one night, I was doing my rounds around the park when all of a sudden, I heard my partner's voice. He simply shouted, "Hey, help me," from a distance. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, so I called it to him, moving my beam across the trees beyond the path. Now, the light that we were given is able to penetrate darkness so well that you could see it at least 100 meters in front of you. But when I illuminated the area my partner's voice was coming from, there was nothing. Moreover, the voice seemed to change the positions that it was coming from. He yelled again, "Hey, help me," and I called him once more, asking him to tell me where he was at, but there was no response. I didn't dare wander into the darkness, especially with no signs of him anywhere, heavy-duty light or not. And then my partner yelled for help again, and I realized something which made the hairs at the back of my neck stand straight. His cries for help were on a loop, always saying the same thing, the same intonation, and the same length of pauses. I even looked at my watch, and sure enough, I was right. Call for help, 8-second pause. Call for help, 8 seconds again. I then realized how suddenly quiet everything was. Usually the park was somewhat loud at night, crickets, owls, etc. Now it was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat thumping. I turned around very slowly and walked out of there, doing my best not to sprint at my partner's looping cries for help persisted almost halfway until I was back at the guardhouse. When I finally did get back, my suspicion was confirmed and my partner was there, visibly confused at what I had just told him. We called up HQ to report suspicious activity, and in no less than 5 minutes, a vehicle pulled up to the entrance. An intervention unit emerged, which was essentially an armored and heavy armored team sent in case of emergencies. I was questioned by the team leader for the next hour, while the others went to the scene where I had heard the voice of my coworker. My partner and I were escorted out of the place, and the following morning, we were told that the part contract was voided by the company, and we no longer needed to go there. I don't know anything else though, because right after it, I returned to my original post back at HQ. I spoke to a former intervention unit member who had worked for a company for over 5 years. He said that some of the stuff he had seen was unimaginable and he was willing to share some with me. For instance, this one time they got a call from a residential building that they were securing, that there were strange noises coming from one of the rooms. The team arrived in the scene and questioned the guard who had reported the incident. Apparently his job was to make sure that no one entered room 416. He explained that the room itself was unoccupied, but that noises would be heard constantly between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Usually those noises would include childlike giggling and loud footsteps, bouncing off something on the floor, and so on. The residents learned to ignore the noises, but this one old lady, Mrs. Rogers, had managed to get in, which he saw on the camera feed. Now the intervention unit was told not to go in after anyone after 20 minutes had passed, but they still had time, so they rushed to the room. The guy who was telling me this said that as they approached the room they heard voices, like a group of people trying to talk in a hushed tone. They explained that it sounded like kids in school when they're trying to whisper, but were unintentionally loud enough for others to hear. As soon as they had touched the doorknob, the voices all stopped in unison. Not like the conversation was over, like literally as if someone had pressed a mute button in the middle of a sentence. They burst inside the empty room, which looked like no one stepped inside for years, weapons raised. No one was there, and as they're standing there completely silent, they hear a barely audible wheezing sound from above. They all look up, and as they do, they freeze. The guy who told me this said that what he saw still keeps him up at night sometimes. Mrs. Rogers was standing in the ceiling like a spider on all fours, craning her neck so much they thought her neck was broken, and she was looking directly at the unit upside down, wide-eyed. A spit was occasionally dropping from her mouth to the floor as she was wheezing. Her fingers had somehow mutated into long claws. And then, without any warning, Mrs. Rogers had managed to jump down on one of the team members in the blink of an eye, and gunshots ensued. He said that by the time they were done shooting, 2 more members were down and Mrs. Rogers had hundreds of bullet holes in her body, and was no longer moving. He had encountered similar scenarios after that, but never came so close to dying again. The building residents were evacuated from the building indefinitely the next day, and the official story given was that there was toxic fungi located within the building. The final story that I'll share here is going to be the one I was told by another guard who went missing later on. He was stationed at a private school, and it had a set of very strict rules that they had to follow. First off, there were 10 guards in total in each shift, and each of them were assigned to a classroom. Their job was to count all of the students after the classes were over. Should any of the students go missing, they were to call HQ immediately. And now comes the weird part. One day, the guard who told me this story counted all the kids in class, and the final number wouldn't add up. Instead of 32 students, he had 33. He counted a few times to make sure, and when the number was confirmed at 33, he told the teacher to start calling them by name and separating them from the group one by one. The teacher does so, calling each and every student. But when they're done, there are no surpluses. The list showed 32, and 32 were called on, and yet 33 students were in the classroom. They couldn't tell you who the extra student was, even when the guard was watching them like a hawk to make sure. None of them would sneak to the group of called-on kids while they weren't looking. Baffled and unsure of what to do, the guy tells the teacher to keep an eye on them while he contacts HQ. Already feeling silly for contacting the higher-ups over an extra student rather than a missing one, he expected HQ to scold him for calling about something like that. But when he says that he is an extra student who just popped up, chuckling at the absurdity of the situation, the person on the other end of the line suddenly goes silent. She asked him to repeat what he had said, and when he does, the woman tells him to get the teacher out of there, lock the classroom immediately, and radio everyone else to do the same at once. He does so, and only a minute later, the intervention unit arrives, escorting the guards out of there. He said that he had no idea what happened next, but when he returned to the school the next day for his shift, everything seemed to be normal. No one really knows what the company is dealing with here. Not even intervention was told what these encounters are, since it seems to be a very strict need-to-know basis. One thing is for sure though, when I hear some of these stories from other guards, I realize how lucky I got to run into some of these creatures and live to tell the tale. I want to start off by clarifying one thing before I start. The company I work for is not the SCP. I know there are a lot of similarities between the encounters which I described in some of the SCP files. My company has nothing to do with that. We are just, as I had stated before, a standalone security company that provides technical security, surveillance, and physical protection services to clients. Now, I'm going to begin this post with a story that still runs chills down my spine. While I was stationed at an office complex similar to the ones in HQ where I am now, I had a number of strange experiences. Our job was mostly staying in our guardhouse and conducting mandatory patrols around the complex at the start and at the end of the shift, him taking one side while I took the other. A few months back, I came to my shift as usual with my partner. So on that day, we finished our initial patrol and returned back to the guardhouse. And we usually talked to pass the time, but this time he seemed unapproachable and quiet. So I figured I should leave him alone and continue to read my book for the time.
Jacob Masterson sat in the wilderness, listening for the small, quiet voice of his God. For 3 days, he had knelt, the Bible clasped in his right hand, his pistols piled up before him. He was close to the edge now, his body a dried-out husk, yet still he would not drink. If this was his time, then he would die here, waiting for the word. Another day and night passed, and still he would not move, even when the storm hit, and wind walked and talked all about him like a living thing. Why was he here? Was it a penance for Jericho? Was it the voice of God he was waiting for, or that of the devil? Finally, with a groan, he slumped over before falling on his back, his hazy blue eyes blinded by the desert sun. North, the wind whispered. Go north. Thy will shall be done. Jacob groaned as he crawled like a broken snake towards his waiting supplies. God was wrathful, all atoned in the end. Jericho, Jacob whispered as the cold water burned his lips. Damn it, Jericho. 3 days before, Jacob had stood upon a hill looking down at a small cattle town. The sun at his back and his poor, tired horse beneath him. He had ridden the mare hard for a full day and night. Now he was here, looking for a man. Not just any man, but a killer. A murderer of innocent women and children. That's what Jacob did. That's how he served God. He hunted down the evil of this world and brought it to justice. Sometimes it was men. Sometimes more than men. Long ago, he had been a preacher, and in some ways, he still was. His chapel was the desert and lonely places. The coyotes and wolves, his flock. He dwelt in the badlands and border towns, listening, always listening for the word. Sometimes it came on the winds, sometimes in his fevered dreams, but it always came. And Jacob followed. Get on, Jacob urged the mare forward, not liking the look of this place. One half the town was in complete darkness, the other lit up like a Christmas tree. It was quiet, too. No cows snorted or stamped their feet. Not a single cricket chirped with the setting sun. And most unnerving of all, not a single sound of human habitation could be heard. No raised voices or bawdy singing coming from a local saloon. No laughing children or giggling wives. Nothing. Whoa, he said, pulling up outside a swinging sign. Jericho, the sign read. Check your guns at the city limit. Fat chance, Jacob said, clambering from his saddle to tie the mare to a nearby hitching post before he retrieved his rifle. He was just about to enter the town when a heavy hand fell upon his shoulder. Jacob dropped his rifle and span about, drawing his six-shooter in one fluid motion. The man before him didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Now, who the hell are you? Jacob asked, taking in the man's rough-looking appearance and straggly beard. Best not to go in there, the stranger said, nodding his shaggy head towards the darkened tower. Why is that? Jacob asked, sliding his finger from around the trigger. Not here, the man said, heading into the darkness. I have a camp up in the hill not too far. We can break bread and talk a little. All right, Jacob said, holstering his gun and retrieving his rifle before falling in beside the stranger. I'm Jacob. You have a name? Ben. But you can call me Bear, the stranger replied. Oh yeah, and why they call you that? The man shrugged. Some say I have the strength of 10 bears. Well, you sure are big enough, Jacob said, taking in the man's huge shoulders and deep chest. Again, the man shrugged. There are many kinds of strength. Yeah, Jacob replied, glancing over his shoulder at the receding town. Yeah, there are. 20 minutes later, the two men were sat in a smoke-filled tent, a roaring fire between them. The nights were getting colder now, and Jacob was happy for the fire's warmth. I'm looking for a man, Jacob began. But the stranger waved that away and handed Jacob a slab of bread and some dried meat. It is customary to eat first before discussing matters of a serious nature. Jacob nodded and accepted the offered food before bowing his head and saying grace. Ben also took up the prayer, his deep voice making it sound almost musical. When the prayer was finished, Jacob raised his head. You a Christian? Yeah, I have been from time to time. Fair enough, Jacob said, finishing his meal and taking a small flask of whiskey from inside his duster. Have a drink? He offered the flask, but the man only drank sparingly before handing it back. Jacob smiled and took a long, hard pull, the fiery liquid warming him all the way down to his boots before lighting up a smoke. You said it was best not to go into town, but I've been told there's a man in Jericho that needs some killing, and I mean to do it. If the man you seek is in Jericho, then that man is dead, or worse. Not many things are worse than death, Jacob said, crushing out his smoke, although I have seen such states from time to time. The stranger nodded his head. Yes, you have the look of a man that has rode hard and seen much. That's why I want you to help me destroy this evil. What evil are we talking about? Jacob asked. Ben did not answer immediately. You said you've seen a few things worse than death. What are these things you've seen? Jacob knew the man had something that he wanted to tell him, but thought that he would have trouble believing it, so Jacob dove right in. If the man thought him mad, Jacob would leave him to his business and go on his way. I've seen many things while serving the Lord. At first, it was just the plain old evil that lives in the hearts of men. Murderers, rapists, thieves. When a man needs killing, the Lord sent me on my way, but there have been times when the Lord has sent me up against things that was not men. Ben leaned eagerly forward. Tell me of these things that have put such a look in your eyes. I've seen men that can turn themselves into great beasts, dead men who stalk the night, feeding off the living in New Mexico. I killed a bruja that cursed her village. She was sacrificing a babe on the altar when I gunned her down, but even then she wouldn't lay still until I stuffed a few pages of a good book into her screaming mouth. Took her head. After I'd finished, the villagers threw her body into a river. Said it was the only way to keep her spirit from returning. And you've killed many of these creatures. A goodly few. And thankfully, they're far and few between. You must love your God very much to perform such miracles in his name. Nope, Jacob replied. He's cold and cruel and wrathful. Even when his own son was dying, he wouldn't take the cup from his lips. So what chance does Jacob Marston have? I follow him because he demands it of me. But I don't much like it. For a moment, the big man seemed to reflect on this. Yes, God can be cruel, he said. Was it God that sent you here? No, the big man replied before reaching behind him and pulling out a small leather bag, which he tossed to Jacob's feet. It was death. Immediately, something in the bag began to twist and turn. What is it? Something of the evil of which you speak, the big man sighed. Jacob eyed the bag wryly before quickly scooping it up. Instantly, a feeling of revulsion like nothing he had ever felt before shot through his body, and with a cry, he threw it down, emptying the contents onto the hard-packed floor. It was a hand, but not like anything Jacob had ever seen before. He was huge, spade-like, covered in black scales. The multi-jointed fingers tipped with razor-like claws. What is it? Jacob asked, never taking his eyes from the now crawling monstrosity. I am not sure. It shifts and changes, Ben replied, grabbing up the claw, which convulsed, grasping at his wrist. With a curse, he wrenched it free and stuffed it back into the sack. See how it twists and turns. It knows its master is near. I used it to track the beast here to this place, I believe. It is some kind of shapeshifter. "And what happened to you?" Jacob asked, crushing out his smoke. "You were attacked, weren't you? By this beast, the shapeshifter. How did you survive?" "I fled," Ben said, looking Jacob straight in the eye. "My courage gave out and I ran like a coward into the forest, while that thing attacked our camp. There were maybe 30 of us. A small logging camp, to be sure, a few strong men, their families, desperate to make a few dollars off the land. But then this stranger arrived. We took him in, and he repaid us with murder and madness." "So you fled. And then how is it you possess this creature's hand?" "I returned, of course," Ben replied, straightening his shoulders. "I prayed all through the long night. The screams of the dying and the creature's terrible laughter and howling echoed through the dark. That's when I heard a voice telling me to return to end this madness, and so I did." How to describe the things I saw that night as I emerged from the forest? The whole camp was ablaze, lighting up the night sky. There were pots and pans strewn about the blood-soaked earth. Bones and chunks of flesh lay scattered all about, and there, dancing amongst the flames, that creature, laughing, gibbering, covered in blood of my loved one. A madness came over me, and I charged the beast, axe raised as I leapt to the flames. The thing spun around, but it was too late. I was already upon the beast, slashing at its loathsome flesh. Screeching, it raised a clawed hand to protect its scabrous head, but I lopped it off. Hot black blood sprayed across my face, driving me on to greater madness. Eventually, my wild swings backed the creature up against a tree. I raised my arms for the killing blow when the creature's face began to ripple and change. My own wife's face looked up at me. Great tears and sadness ran down her face. "You abandoned us," she sobbed. "You ran away, and now we are one with the beast." I knew it for a ruse, but still I hesitated, and in that split second, the creature fled howling into the night. "And you tracked it here using that thing?" Jacob said, nodding towards the still squirming sack. "Yes," Ben replied. "The creature was here in this town, spreading its madness. I've heard screams these past few nights and the sound of gunfire." "And you did nothing?" "No," he said, settling down by the fire. "I was waiting. For you." The next morning, the two men set out. Jacob cleaned and blessed his pistols, reciting the Lord's Prayer over them again and again, splashing the gleaming metal with blessed water. He also carried a rifle across his back and a small black Bible, from which many pages were missing. Ben walked beside him, a large axe in his hand, a huge buck knife hanging at his waist. "What should we expect?" Jacob said as they approached the outskirts of town. "Madness," the big man replied. "There is something you should know. This creature, whatever it is, spreads madness and death. When I buried my people back at the camp, I saw signs of mutilation, self-mutilation." The big man swallowed hard. "It's like this thing gets into people's minds and drives them crazy." Jacob drew his pistols. "Well, we'd better get to it then." Ben said nothing, but trotted to keep up, as Jacob lengthened his stride, eager to smite the evil that now haunted this town. They passed a saloon, its dusty bat-wing doors creaking in the growing wind. "You know," Jacob said, glancing around, "for a place of madness and death, kind of quiet. You don't think it knows we're That was as far as he got. Suddenly, there was a scream, and the street began to fill with howling people who flooded like locusts from the nearby houses and buildings, their clothes torn, their chomping jaws bloody and foaming. Jacob's hands began to do their deadly dance, gunning down the screaming mob. By his side, Ben let out a war cry and waded in, cutting down men, children, and women alike. Jacob's smoking guns clicked empty, and with a curse, he backed into the saloon, his nimble fingers ramming gleaming cartridges into the smoking chambers. A man suddenly lunged from behind the bar. "Surprise!" he screamed through bloody teeth. "Fuck you," Jacob replied, smashing a nearby bottle of whiskey across his face. The crowd was nearly upon him now, tearing at his clothes. With a cry, he vaulted the bar and ran across its length, firing into the screeching crowd as he banged through the back door and into the street, praying Ben was still alive. He rounded the corner of the building, one down boot heels, kicking up dust. As his fingers automatically rammed more cartridges home, the crowd was thinning now under the onslaught of Jacob's guns. But still, on they came. Praying, Jacob stopped and turned just as a naked fat man rounded the corner, his dick swinging in the wind beneath the belly filled with flesh of his neighbors. Jacob did not hesitate but pulled the trigger, blowing the top of the howling man's head off. A woman was next, her face covered in bite marks, her eyes black and doll-like. Jacob gave her more of the same. Now only a few stragglers remain, an old man waving a cane with bloody teeth, a small child wielding a large butcher's knife, and a naked girl, both nipples bitten away and her breasts covered in blood. Jacob gunned them all down without mercy, knowing they were all cursed, possessed by some terrible evil. As Jacob watched on, a final opponent charged. A man dressed in a miner's clothes, wielding a splintered chair leg. The man swung high, but Ben ducked low, slicing his knife across the snarling man's guts. The man carried on, betrayed by his own furious swing, leaving the back of his head exposed. With another maniacal laugh of glee, Ben brought down his axe, whistling into the back of the man's head, ending the fight in a welter of hair and blood. He didn't stop there, but he fell to his knees, arms pistoning up and down as he started to chop the man into tiny pieces. "Ben!" Jacob cried, wondering if the big man had lost his mind. "For the love of God, stop! He's dead! They're all dead!" For a moment, he turned and stared at Jacob, his eyes blank. But then he gave himself a shake and his eyes cleared. "Yes," he said, taking a shuddering breath. They are all dead. But not the creature. We must find it. And perhaps any survivors." Jacob added, "Survivors? Perhaps, but it is unlikely. No one in my camp survived." "Maybe not," Jacob said, holstering his guns. "We have to check anyway." "Yes, I suppose. There is a church at the end of town. Perhaps some of the townsfolk may have fled there. We should check it out." "All right," Jacob said. "Lead the way." A few minutes later, they were stood outside a small wooden church, all white boards and peeling paint. The doors were firmly shut, but already Jacob could hear murmurs from within. "Okay," Jacob said, turning to the big man, eyeing his blood-soaked muscles. "Let me handle this. He'll take one look at you and die of fright. You just hang back until I sort out the whole affair." "Yes," Ben replied. "This is your domain, preacher, not mine." Jacob ignored that and hurried up the stairs before banging on the door noisily. "Hello inside! Open up! It's safe now." "Go away, creature," a wavering voice answered. "We know your tricks. We're safe in the house of God." "It must have been here," Jacob whispered, but the big man was not listening. He only stared up at the cloud-covered sky as if wishing he was somewhere else. "Listen, my name is Jacob Marston. I'm a preacher. I've been sent here to help you." "Go away, creature," another voice spoke up. "You cannot enter the house of God." "God damn it," Jacob hissed to himself. "I'm too goddamn scared to listen to reading." "Looks like the hard way then." Drawing his pistols, he unloaded them into the door. From inside came the screams of women and frightened children. as he brought a booted foot down onto the now busted lock and kicked the door wide open. A gunshot rang out and something plucked at his sleeve. But Jacob ignored it and walked inside, ignoring the milling people in the room. He dipped his fingers into a nearby font and made the sign of the cross. He turned back to them, eyeing a man half hidden behind a pew, a shaking rifle in his hand, a dirty Roman collar around his neck. "You must be the preacher, I reckon," Jacob said, watching the man carefully. "Like I said, I am here to help you." "You're not that thing," the man replied, lowering his rifle. "It can't come in here. It's tried to lure us outside before with empty promises, even mimicking the voices of loved ones, but we all knew it for a lie." Parishioners, yeah. He looked desperately at his parishioners, who nodded their support. "How many are you?" Just what you see here. Just me, my wife, and Jenny and Joseph.
Hey, get out
From a little ways down the street, and their two boys, Michael and David. The rest of the town went insane, attacking each other, biting and tearing. We all fled into the church and locked ourselves in. And that same night, that thing turned up at the door. First it threatened us, and then it started to offer us things. I sent the others away so they wouldn't be tempted.
What did it offer you?
Jacob asked. But the priest only shook his head, his cheeks flushed. "No matter. We didn't heed the voice of the devil."
That's good. You can't stay here. We need to get you and the children to safety.
"We can't leave here," the preacher said, shaking his head violently.
The townspeople are all dead. My friend and I took care of them.
"What friend?" the priest asked, trying to look around Jacob.
Ben, come in here for a moment.
Jacob yelled. But there was only the sighing of wind from the outside.
Ben!
He called again, heading outside, but the big man was gone.
Goddamn fool.
Might have gone to find the creature.
Come on, grab your things. We're heading out. We have a camp nearby in the hills. You should be safe there. I have to hurry back and help my friend.
For a moment, the priest seemed torn, but the look on Jacob's face looked no argument. He gathered his people together and hurried outside. As soon as the last person stepped outside, there was a resounding crash as the church doors were slammed shut. Jacob turned on his heels, hand dropping towards the butt of his gun, but hesitating when he saw Ben, who stood on the steps, beaming down at him.
Ah, Jacob.
The big man grinned.
What a marvel you are. I've been trying for days to get these little rabbits out of their hole. And you come along so trusting, so forthright. Out they come.
He giggled incessantly, his face growing elongated, his body becoming impossibly thin and scaled.
Mother of God!
Jacob cursed.
Ben! Ben is dead.
The creature hissed through crooked teeth.
May he burn in hell forever. Look what he did to me.
It screeched, holding up its ragged stump of an arm from which black blood still oozed.
I was fulfilled. All I wanted to do was go back to sleep in my dark cave and wait for Mother Moon to awaken me once more. But not now. Not when I am not complete. I need these people, it said, poking forward. I must be restored before the long sleep. So sorry.
It chuckled, running a blackened tongue over its drooling lips.
God cursed son of a bitch!
Jacob growled, slapping leather. He drew his gun, but there was only a dry click. Screeching, the creature leapt forward, barreling into Jacob, sending him crashing to the ground, his pistols flying out into the dust. For a moment, it loomed above him, and Jacob was sure that he was dead, but the creature leapt away, chasing down the fleeing townsfolk, who ran in panic-stricken circles. By the time Jacob managed to climb to his feet, it was all over. Blood and body parts lay strewn all about. Only the beast remained, whole and intact once more.
Children always taste the best,
it said, sucking on its bloody claws, so young, so tender. But Jacob wasn't listening. He was already running, full tilt, back towards the church, his arms pumping, duster coat flapping out behind him. The creature gave a cheating howl and lunged after him. Jacob was almost at the steps when the creature leapt for his unprotected back. Lightning fast, he spun about and dropped on his back, pistoning his legs upward. He caught the creature high in the midriff and, using its own momentum, catapulted it up and forward, straight through the church doors. Instantly, the creature began to scream and wither, thrashing on the floor, smoke streaming from its burning back. Jacob jumped onto his feet and, smiling, paced into the church, his grimy fists clenching and unclenching. "Rejoice," he intoned. "Rejoice in the Lord, O you righteous. Praise befits the upright." Reaching down, he grabbed the screaming creature by the back of its neck, avoiding its swiping claws and dragging it toward a nearby font. "I will instruct you and teach you in the ways you should go. I'll counsel you with my eyes upon you," he quoted, smashing the creature's face into the font, submerging its scabrous head into the blessed waters, which instantly began to bubble and steam. The creature went wild with its thrashing. With a curse, Jacob pulled a silvered knife from his belt. It stabbed the creature's side over and over again, drenching himself in its vile blood, its body twisting and turning, but Jacob bared down, pinning the thing in place until at last, bloody and defeated, it lay still. Jacob released the creature, letting the remains fall to the floor. "Requiem aeternam dom est domine et lux perpetua leteo est," he intoned, making the sign of the cross over the smoking remains before stepping outside into the blazing sunlight. He stayed in Jericho for another 2 weeks, burying the dead where he could find them, before venturing into the desert. Many had died by his hand, innocent and cursed alike. Now was a time for reflection and atonement. But now that time had finished. He had come out of the desert, weak but cleansed, the voice of God ringing in his ears. North. Go north. And so he had. Following the Santa Fe Trail from New Mexico, deep into Comanche territory and beyond. At first, he slept rough, the smoke from a small campfire bringing on haunting dreams. His days nodding on his saddle, and for a time, he stayed with a wagon train, trading the protection of his guns for food. Another time, he stayed with a group of prospectors who were heading north, the smell of gold dust filling their minds with a strange kind of fever. North. Go north. And so he had. He'd followed the Santa Fe Trail from New Mexico deep into the Comanche territory and beyond. At night he slept rough, the smoke of his small campfire bringing on haunting dreams. His days nodding on his saddle. For a time he stayed with a wagon train, trading the protection of his gun for food. Another time he stayed with a group of prospectors who were also heading north, the smell of gold dust filling their minds with a strange kind of fever. After many months in the saddle, he left the scrub lands and desert behind, entering the lush green flatlands of the Midwest. That night he dreamed of a great lake surrounded by low-lying hills and spruce forest. He woke with a name upon his lips. Hell Creek. It took Jacob another 3 days to locate the town. He had been directed from a rancher named David Bayan, who he'd met on the road. The man was thin as a weasel, with a rat face to boot, but his disposition was sunny. The two men rode together for a little while until they came to a crossroad. There, the skinny rancher had taken the path bearing to left. He had instructed Jacob to follow the path to the right that came out of the illustrious town of Hell Creek. Jacob had waved the man farewell, I hurriedly followed the path for some miles until at last he crested a small hillock, revealing the town below. From what Jacob could see, the town was aptly named. The town was bisected, almost split in half, by a small river that seemed to run straight through the middle. The side had been shored up with concrete, making a kind of small canal, which was spanned by a couple of rickety-looking bridges before it seemingly vanished underground. The town looked like something straight out of a fairy tale, and yet the whole scene made Jacob feel nervous. There was something here, something in the air, a kind of heaviness that made it difficult to breathe, like trying to breathe in a mouthful of syrup. Well, he said to himself, you're not gonna find out shit. Sat here with your thumb up your ass. Get along, horse, he said, nudging the animal forward. But the big mare wouldn't move. Even when Jacob nudged her with his spurs, she wouldn't budge. It grew belligerent, snorting, pawing at the ground. Okay, Jacob said, dismounting and stroking her neck gently. That's a girl, he crooned, taking her by the reins. He gently pulled her forward. At first she resisted, but after some cajoling and more than a little cursing, she reluctantly came along. The first building Jacob came to as he entered the town proper was a jailhouse. A man stood outside, and slender, chugging on a cigar as he watched Jacob approach. Morning, he waved, coming down the stairs and heading straight towards Jacob, who noticed the glittering star upon his chest. Morning, Jacob replied, not liking the way the man's eyes roamed over him, lingering on the guns at his hip. Afraid you have to check those shooting irons. Town ordinance, I'm afraid. No firearms inside the city limits. Jacob's eyes stayed on the man's own revolver. The other man followed him, grinning, and held out his hand. Sheriff Marty Williams, he laughed. I get to keep mine. Perks of the job. Jacob took the offered hand, which was soft and oily. He pumped it once and let it go. Jacob. Name's Jacob Marsden. Funny, he said, glancing around at the men passing to and fro. Looks like a lot of these men are breaking the town ordinance. I know them, the sheriff said, his eyes remaining, but his hand had dropped almost casually towards his gun belt. But I don't know you. So give 'em up, turn yourself around, go find another town to drink at. We ain't much for strangers anyway. Okay, Jacob shrugged, unfastening his gun belt and handing it over. I'll take the rifle, too, the sheriff said, nodding towards Jacob's horse. Jacob sauntered over to his mare, grabbed up the rifle and handed it over. Had everything? The sheriff asked. Just my knife. You want that too? No, you can keep it. You can collect these, he said, hefting Jacob's gun, when you leave. You just stay out of trouble while you're here. It's a good town with good people, quiet place. That's how we like it. You understand? Sure, Jacob replied. All I want is a hot meal and a bath. I won't stay too long. Well, that's just fine. Have yourself a good day, Jacob. There a church in town? No, the sheriff replied over his shoulder. Burned down some years back. And you didn't rebuild it? Jacob called after him. But he was talking to fresh air. The sheriff had already gone, slamming the door behind him. One of the first things Jacob noticed as he crossed the street towards the local hotel and eatery was the women. Not because he hadn't been with one for a while, although he hadn't, but because they all seemed pregnant. Everywhere he looked, there was a round belly. From the earliest teenager girl right up to the woman far past their prime, all seemed to be carrying a heavy load. Well, he thought to himself a little ruefully, probably not much else to do in a little fat shit burg like this. For now, he put it out of his mind. He was hungry and filthy from his long months on the road. All he wanted now was a hot meal and a warm bath. Later, he would head down the street, see if he could find this ruined church of theirs, have him a little look around. His bath was like his meal, warm, barely satisfactory. His room was more of the same, a bed, a dresser, and not much else. Still, it was better than the hard-packed earth and a saddle for a pillow. Unable to resist the pull of sleep, Jacob laid down and was almost instantly asleep. He woke sometime later with the setting sun. The noise from the local saloon had become a raucous background noise. Still, he was glad of it. If the bawling, singing, and drunken laughter had not woken him, he may have easily slept through to morning. And there was still much to do. Take a look at this burnt-down church of theirs. Not that there was anything unusual about a burnt-down church. Most of the houses, if not all the town, would be made from lumber. It was the fact that they had not rebuilt their house of worship that troubled Jacob. The church was a meeting place for the community, a beacon of hope in dark times, a place to cleanse the soul and seek forgiveness. Yet the denizens of Hell Creek had left theirs to rot for 2 years. It smelt wrong to Jacob, and he decided to check it out before he lost too much of the light. Hurrying down the stairs, he headed into the street and across a small wooden bridge to the local saloon. Whiskey had a way of loosening the tongues. Jacob had many questions. Pushing through the battling doors, Jacob felt the atmosphere thick with cigar smoke, and the smell of cheap whiskey perfumed the air. For a moment, conversation faltered, and Jacob could feel many eyes upon him as he sauntered across the room to the beer-soaked bar. "Coffee," he said to the mustachioed man behind the bar. "We don't sell coffee, stranger," the fat man sneered, wiping his hand on a filthy apron. "Only beer, whiskey. We may have a soda pop round here somewhere if you fancy it." After a few laughs from a group of nearby men at the bar, but Jacob ignored them. "Whiskey, then," Jacob said, blue eyes drilling into the barman's face. "And be quick about it." The barman smiled, wilted under the icy gaze, and he hurriedly poured Jacob's drink, sloshing a goodish amount on the bar before quickly scurrying away. Jacob turned and faced the room, but nobody met his gaze. And soon, the piano player struck up another tune, breaking the ominous silence. Slowly, conversation started back up, and the denizens of the town went back to their drinking and debauchery, leaving Jacob alone to scan the room. He was on his second drink when he noticed the girl in the corner. She was dressed gaily, all feathers and tight corsets, and Jacob guessed correctly that she was one of the whores that worked the establishment. But unlike the other girls who flitted from customer to customer, trying hard to ply their trade, this girl sat alone, looking sullenly like a half-empty glass of beer. Jacob could clearly see the reason why. The girl was pretty, and had one hell of a scar running from her right eye across the bridge of her nose, teetering off down the side of her left cheek. Someone did quite the number on her, Jacob thought. She approached, trying not to draw too much unwanted attention. "Hi," he said, taking a seat beside her in a quiet corner. "Name's Jacob." "Annabelle," she said, smiling thinly. "You too broke to pay for a good whore? Wondering if you can get a discount for this one?" she said, gesturing to her face. "You do." "I don't mind paying the full price," Jacob smiled. "I have more than a few scars of my own, and they don't bother me none." The girl smiled to think on this for a while before taking his hand and leading him upstairs to her room. They had barely got through the door when the girl started to strip. "Okay, full price is $5. You can wash your pecker over there," she said, nodding her head to a wash bowl and jug. "How about $10 and you get to keep your clothes on?" The girl stopped fumbling at her corset and just looked at him. "Lord God, what now? What kind of crazy shit you into, mister?" Jacob laughed at this and sat down on the bed, hat in hand. "No crazy shit. Just a little information's all." The girl laughed, harsh and unpleasant. "Damn, mister, I don't know nothing about nothing around here." "The simple thing. I just want to know where the local church is, that's all." "You're going to pay me $10 and get directions to an old burnt-down church?" "Yep," Jacob replied. "That and your silence. I don't want anyone to know that I'm looking into things." "What things?" the girl asked nervously, her eyes shifting around the room. "There's nothing to look into." "Mayhaps there is. Mayhaps there isn't," Jacob said, standing up.
But I intend to take me a look anyways. You're an outsider here, like I am. You don't need no scar across your face to tell me that.
I haven't been here long. I came looking for my sister. We worked in a cattle town about 30 miles from here. Well, that was before this happened.
She gestured to her face.
She said I was bringing her down, and so she left heading for Hell's Creek and new clientele. She didn't invite me to come along, so I stayed here in Stetson for a while. I missed her, so I took a stagecoach to town, but by the time I got here, she was already gone. At least that's what the sheriff said. I was convinced to stay in the end, she said, looking at the floor. Nobody ever leaves here. Not really.
What do you mean? What's going on in this place?
Keep your $10, the girl said, suddenly standing. St. Mark's, or what's left of it anyway, is at the west end of town, about 3 streets over, right on the outskirts. You may find somebody there who can help you. I'll keep your secret, but you should leave this town, Jacob. Just as soon as you can. No good can ever come from this place.
And just like that, she was gone. Only the smell of her cheap perfume marked her passing. Jacob sat for a while, taking in her words before heading into the street, turning west through the growing shadows. 20 minutes later, he stood before the ruin of St. Mark's, which slumped in the darkness underfoot at Jacob's approach, as with a sigh he took in the devastation. Someone did quite the job, he whispered to himself, crumbling a piece of burnt charcoal under his nose, not surprised by the smell of gasoline he found there. A tittering cackle came from the shadows, and Jacob's hand flew to his waist. Finding nothing there, he drew his knife from the back of his jeans. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness.
Put up your pig sticker, preacher man. Old Marjorie won't hurt you.
"Come out where I can see you," Jacob said, his eyes searching the darkness.
The knife, the voice replied. Put it up, preacher, and come inside.
Jacob took a deep breath, sheathed his knife, but kept his hand near as he entered the ruin. A light flared and grew brighter as an oil lamp was lit, driving back some of the gloom. Jacob squinted through the darkness, making out a hunched figure wrapped in tatty old blankets in one ruined corner. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was a woman, filth streaked with matted white hair. "Who are you?" he asked, stopping only a few steps away. "How'd you know I was a preacher?"
The voice of the dead. I hear 'em, you see. Cries of all those poor dead children.
"What dead children? What happened in this place?"
Seen you, the woman sighed, a shudder racking her scrawny frame. A pale horse, rider in the wilderness. A man driven mad by God. I seen you wash in flames, preacher. Marjorie knows. Marjorie has the sight.
"You're mad."
"Mad?" she hissed, thrusting her face into the light, revealing gaping sockets where her eyes should have been.
Jacob swallowed hard but said nothing.
"Yeah, she said, retreating back into the shadows. Driven mad by the followers."
"What followers? Make sense, woman."
"Cathon!" the woman screamed. "They took me down into the darkness. Look!" she said, leaping to her feet, throwing off her lice-ridden blanket, revealing her nakedness beneath. There was a flash of steel, and the woman thrust a rusty-looking blade deep into her abdomen, drawing it across, disemboweling herself. "Look!" she cried, thrusting her filthy hand inside her ruined stomach, blood pouring from her mouth, cascading down her legs like a waterfall. "Empty! So empty!"
There was a sudden loud boom, and a smoking hole appeared in the dying woman's forehead.
Jacob spun about with a cry and looked straight into the barrel of the sheriff's revolver. "Take him," the sheriff said. The two burly-looking men who came on grinning as Jacob backed up, drawing his knife. "Tut, tut!" the sheriff laughed. "Never bring a knife to a gunfight, boy. Now put it down, or I'll shoot your legs out from under you."
For a moment, Jacob was tempted to fight. But with a curse, he threw his knife into the dust.
Tie him up, hands behind his back, nice and tight. Tonight, he shall witness the glory of Cathod before I offer him up as a sacrifice to the Old One. The hell are you talking about? Jacob cursed as the two men roughly tied his hands behind his back, the rough hemp rope digging rudely into his flesh. Who is that? You'll see, the sheriff sneered. You'll see much and know an agony of delicious pain before this night is through. So I promise you. That, I promise you. Bring him, he said to the two men. Congregation awaits. The town was all but deserted, as Jacob was half marched, half dragged through the night. Even the body saloon was dark, silent, and not a person moved through the streets. Eventually, they arrived at the steep-sided canal where a small barge lit only by a burning oil lamp awaited them. Get in, the sheriff said, pushing Jacob hard over the edge. With a grunt, Jacob landed hard, groaning. He sat up as the other men leapt aboard, shoving him back down. Get us there, the sheriff said. The other two men hurriedly took up the oars and began to row through the brackish waters. Soon the stars appeared and were replaced by slime-covered bricks as the small boat entered a shadowy tunnel leading beneath the silent town. What is this place? Jacob said, straining at his bonds, but the question was answered by a booted foot. Open your mouth again. I'll cut out your tongue, the sheriff said, grinning at him ghoulishly. Your heretic voice will not desecrate these sacred caverns. After what seemed like an eternity to Jacob's tired mind, the small boat came to a swaying halt. He was dragged out and thrust onto the stone-cold floor. Cursing, the two men dragged him back to his feet. What he saw then took his breath away. They were in a large, vaulted cavern. Stalagmites grew all about. Strange black crystal formations lay dotted here and about, twisted into tortured forms. But it was not this that instilled such a deep-seated fear in Jacob. At the far end of the room, lit by flickering torches, was a great temple, built into the very bedrock itself. Huge spiral pillars rearing into the darkness, highly decorated with twisted, tortured symbols that hurt Jacob's mind just to look at. Welcome to the Temple of Chathat, the sheriff whispered into his ear. The Old One awaits inside. It's harvest time, time of reaping and gathering. He grows hungry, and his hunger must be sated. Jacob said nothing as he was led inside. Down a dark tunnel, his eyes were moving constantly, yet he kept his demeanor soft, all slumped shoulders and shuffling feet. A broken man was not so closely guarded and could make good use of an opportunity that should happen to arise. The tunnel suddenly ended, and the sheriff threw open a large wooden door, blackened with age. Behold, he screamed, the Temple of Chathat. Light flooded the tunnel, followed by a hellish chanting, like some terrible drum, charging the air with electricity, making it hard to breathe, causing Jacob's skin to tighten and crawl as he was pushed inside. Everywhere, there were people dressed in flowing red robes, their faces covered in white masks, making them look corpse-like in the flickering light of 1,000 torches. At the end of the room was a large stone altar. Behind it, a massive stone well loomed above a screaming woman who sweated, writhed, and twisted. As Jacob was dragged closer, he saw, to his horror, that the woman was in the deep throes of labor. Stood beside her was the high priest, his robes black as midnight, his mask carved with a single terrible glaring eye. The sacrifice approaches, the priest screamed above the thunderous chanting. Reaching between the woman's quivering legs, he tore the newborn child from her, cutting the birthing cord with a small, glittering knife. For the sound of the child's first hitching breaths, The whole ground began to shake, and the terrible chanting turned into a screaming deluge as the great jet of filthy water gushed from the slime-encrusted well, rearing like a column into the fetid night air. Before Jacob's terrified eyes, the churning water began to take on shape, to transform until a great and terrible worm reared above him. Along its segmented body, 1,000 blind eyes twitched and turned. "Behold," the priest said, turning to his congregation, "the Great One, Chethat, we bring you sacrifice, great Lord," he said, raising the bawling child above his head. The creature let out a bellow of triumph, turning its swaying head from which glared a single crimson eye towards the now chanting priest. Its fanged mouth opened, revealing row after row of jagged teeth. It lunged forward, snatching the screaming infant up and down its throat, silencing its pathetic screams forever. "Now," the sheriff said, dragging Jacob forward, "you'll make a sacrifice unto him. He'll devour you, heart and soul, and you will live in him forever." "What is this?" The high priest glared down at Jacob. "Another sacrifice, Lord," the sheriff fawned. "For the old one is forever hungry." "So be it. Bring him to me. Let the old one be fulfilled." Jacob still did not struggle as he was dragged on, but his eyes searched frantically for a way out. "Chethat," the old priest boomed, turning back towards the swaying worm. "Take this one onto yourself. Show him the fate of all heretics." Again, the worm let out a terrible bellow and began his downward strike, just as Jacob's eyes opened to a nearby oil lamp. With a cry, he pistoned out his leg and shattered the burning lamp against the altar. Immediately, his booted foot and dusty jacket were set ablaze. The great worm tried to rear back, but it was too slow, as with a cry of outrage, Jacob tore a blazing spur across the crimson eye. The great worm screeched in agony and began to mindlessly flail about, crashing into Jacob and his captors, sending them sprawling on the floor, instantly killing the high priest as it writhed and rolled, blind and insane with agony. The room was now in complete disarray. The fire had spread, setting ablaze to the nearby crimson banners, catching on people's clothes as they fled in terror, trying to escape the thrashing worm. Jacob felt the flames burning his back, but did not run, but embraced them, thrusting his bound hands into the flames, ignoring the pain till at last his bounds parted. To his left, the sheriff, torn and bloody, was staggering to his feet. "You," he began, but that was as far as he went. Jacob closed the distance between them in 2 angry strides. His hands, fast as lightning, grabbed the sheriff's guns and shot the protesting man twice through the throat. He did not stop there, but turned his outrage upon the fleeing crowd, adding to their terror as he pumped round after round of hot lead into men and women alike. When the guns clicked empty, he turned around, ignoring the hot barrels, as he waded in, pistol-whipping them down and beating them with his booted heel as they tried to escape his terrible wrath, all the time making his way towards the waiting exit, dodging the writhing worm. The fallen god, Chethat, whose death throes had started to weaken as the fire burned its vile body, cleansed its filth from the world. At last, he made the doorway and threw himself through the flames, licking at his back. A few of the cultists had also managed to escape and were now fleeing down a small side tunnel. Just then, the earth let out another groan and the tunnel collapsed in a deluge of dust and rubble, burying the fleeing cultists alive. Scrambling to his feet, Jacob jumped into the small boat and grabbed up the paddles, rowing for all he was worth until at last he emerged onto the moonlit night. "Praise God," he gasped, leaping from the boat. And just then there was another great rumbling from deep in the ground as a part of the town suddenly tilted. Then, with a resounding crash and a roar of flames, it fell into the earth. By the flickering flame light, something seemed to move in the murky waters, something long and worm-like gliding through the depths. Jacob blinked his eyes, and it was gone. "Enough," he gasped, staggering away. "For the love of God, enough." Jacob Masterson awoke with a scream locked behind his lips, his body covered in a cold sweat. "Hell's Creek," he mumbled, throwing off his rough blanket before hunkering down by the dying firelight. Overhead, there was a sullen rumble of thunder as the storm approached. Jacob looked up into the cold night sky, his nostrils flaring as he smelt the first whiff of ozone. Standing, he stripped off his soiled clothes and knelt. A few moments later, the skies erupted, and the deluge of rain hit, pounding Jacob's scarred, battered body, washing away the filth of Hell's Creek. For hours, he knelt, his muscles cramping, his body tensed, steel, shaking with cold. The pounding rain turned into a stinging hail that swept across the land, driven by the howling wind. "What do you want from me?" Jacob raised his face to the wind. "What the fuck do you want from me?" He jumped to his feet and screamed up at the night sky. "When will it be enough? Ain't I paid my dues? When can I rest?" Suddenly a face flashed across his mind, following corn silk hair and blue eyes as deep as the ocean. It was the face of his long-dead wife, Jane. Another image followed the same face, bloody and torn by ragged claw marks. "Don't you dare!" Jacob howled, scrambling for his shooting irons, which hung from a nearby tree. He began to fire them into the sky, his face a rigor of hate. "Don't you fucking dare!" Just then, lightning struck a nearby tree, the noise of thunder booming like the end of the world. Jacob cast his now empty pistols into the dust. "Go on then!" he screamed, shaking his fist at the sky. "How dare you! But you better send me straight to hell, because if I reach those pearly gates, I'm gonna spit right in your eye, you hear me? I don't need to be reminded of my debt to you." And just like that, the rain stopped as quickly as it had begun. The first rays of dawn pierced the veil of night. Exhausted, Jacob fell to his knees, and then onto his back. "I'm sorry, Jane. I should have been there." Slowly, he closed his eyes and began to slumber, the warmth of a new day covering him like the very hand of God. Jacob awoke sometime later, the sun high in the sky. With a groan, he staggered to his feet before drinking thirstily from his nearby canteen and slowly getting dressed. He was starting to feel guilty now. It was always like this for him around the anniversary of Jane's death. Still, he had no right to be braying at God like a stubborn mule. The thing was, he did owe God, and perhaps it was a debt that he could never truly repay. For after all, was it not God that had led him to a creature that had so brutally murdered his beloved wife? Was it not God that had shown him the ways of the blessed silver and the cleansing fire? Perhaps, if Jacob had known he'd be signing such a contract with a creature's blood.
Recognize me from the posters?
But Jacob pushed that away. He was no liar, especially to himself.
More money.
He would have done it
Okay.
all exactly the
Well, let's get a
same.
look at you.
Hell,
Told the
he would have
woman I
hunted
had
that
some
vile
work, but I was
creature to the
hoping-
ends of the earth and
Well, who
beyond
knows
to
what I was
avenge
hoping.
Jane's death.
Call me the boy.
And if he died and ended up in
big, ain't
hell, he would hunt that son of a bitch through the flames
Slow, I
of
bet,
eternal
too.
damnation
I
forever.
bet I could have 3 in you before you even
Sighing, he lit up a
blinked.
smoke. Pushing such heavy thoughts away, he saddled up his horse,
That's why I'm
climbing aboard to the creak of
boss,
leather.
And you're
Go on,
I do
get,
everything twice as
he
fast
said,
as everybody
nudging
else.
the big
At
mare
15,
forward.
I've done more than most men at 30.
But she wouldn't
If
budge.
I make it to 30,
Come
I'll
on
be
now,
president.
girl,
You
he
can
said,
take that to the
nudging her
bank.
again with a slight hint of spur.
Now, what was I talking
But
about?
still, she wouldn't move.
Work. That was
Okay, okay,
Fellas I know. Gotta run
Jacob
them with the
said,
law.
a
They got
small
caught robbing
smile
on
playing across
stage.
his rugged
There's posse
features.
after them. They're going down to Limpy.
Reckon you've been having some dreams of your own.
Okay? Make this
Either
Latin
way.
thing official. How's about that?
He slackened the reins, and immediately
Good.
she turned in the opposite
Don't get after
direction
them,
Jacob had
lackey.
been facing
Come on,
and began
that's
to
the spirit.
amble along.
Go!
Jacob began to laugh. Who he heeds wholesome abomination will abide amongst the wise, he intoned. And you Humility goes before honor. The big mare heard him. She gave no sign, but picked up her pace. Soon they were flying like the wind, heading towards the Arizona territories and beyond. The journey was a pretty uneventful affair. Jacob spent his time like he always did, the hot days nodding over his saddle, trying to recover from another restless night on the trail. It was on just such a night he tossed and turned, mumbling to himself that the first bout of trouble really started. Jacob was dreaming of a man plagued by the devil, an executioner surrounded by a swirling black aura. In his left hand he held a hell-bound blade that burned with eternal fire. In his right, an endless stream of blood pouring forth, turning to molten lava as it hit the scorching and blackened ground. Then I saw an angel, the man said, turning to face Jacob. Sitting in the sun, with a loud voice he called to all the birds of mid-heaven. Come and gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders. For he has set his mark upon them, the mark of the beast, and they who bear the mark will be cast down, and the birds will gorge upon their ruined flesh. Suddenly the man's mouth shot open, stretching impossibly wide, eating up his face. A mass of ravens issued forth, hundreds, thousands. They screeched as they flew at Jacob, tearing at his skin, gouging out his eyes. Just then, a dry twig snapped like a gunshot to Jacob's right, and he flew awake, not sure if he was still dreaming. The man stepped from behind a nearby cactus. His pistol was aimed at Jacob's chest as he entered the firelight's flickering glow. "I got him!" The man cried over his shoulder excitedly. "I got him dead to rights, Henry." Jacob said nothing, taking in the man's torn and tattered uniform. "Well, that's swell," another man said, emerging from the shadows. This man was larger than his weasel-like friend, all grizzled cheeks and bulging belly. In his meaty arms, he carried a double-barrel shotgun. "Don't recall any battles going on around these parts," Jacob said, sitting up, slowly making sure to keep his hands well away from his pistol belt. "Nope," the big man grinned. "And that's just the way we like it, ain't it, Patrick?" he said, glancing over at the other man before turning his attention back to Jacob. "Seems to me these southern boys don't know when to quit, so me and old Patrick here gave ourselves an honorable discharge." The other man yee-hawed at that, but the big man didn't even cut a smile. "So you're deserters then?" Jacob spat into the dirt. "Let me guess. You're just heading home, all righteous like, to tend your crops." The big man laughed at this. "Hell no! Farming's too much like hard work. Me and Patrick, we find taking other people's things a damn sight easier. Even more so when they're dead. So," he said, leveling the shotgun at Jacob's face, "Viva con Dios, stranger." Jacob suddenly burst into an uproarious laughter, catching the big man by surprise. "What the hell are you laughing at?" he asked again. "Sorry," Jacob said, wiping pretend tears from his eyes. "When you stepped out of the shadows, wearing that Union uniform, I nearly shit my britches. Thought the whole damn Union army had come for me on account of that cash box I stole." "Cash box?" the other man said quickly, his eyes beginning to sparkle. "And what cash box would that be?" "Don't mind if I stand by you," Jacob said, not waiting for an answer, as he clambered to his feet, his hands raised. Big man saw the gleaming pistol at Jacob's hip and pulled back both hammers of his shotgun. "Lose them pistols, my friend." "No problem. No problem at all," Jacob said, slowly undoing his gun belt and letting it fall at his feet. "Never was too damn good at those smoke wagons anyway. I'm just a thief. My partner who likes to do the killing," he said quickly, glancing over to the other man's shoulder. With a hiss, the big man turned, but only for a second before seeing the ruse for what it was. A simple distraction. But a second was all the time that Jacob needed. With a cry, he threw himself down, drawing his pistols as he landed in the hard dirt. The weasel-looking fella, the one the big man had called Patrick, cried out a warning, firing into the dust all around Jacob, but Jacob ignored him. The other man was now swiveling back around, his face contorted with cheated rage. Jacob took careful aim, bullets flying all around him, and squeezed off a single shot. blowing the top of the man's head off in a welter of blood, brains, and bone. The skinny man's pistols now clicked empty, and with a cry, he cast them down and took off running in great clumsy strides. Cursing, Jacob rolled to his feet, his eyes narrowing at the figure merged with the darkness. "Oh, no, you don't, friend," he said, leveling his pistol, which barked off a single shot. There was a cry of pain and a heavy thud as Jacob's shot found its target. Then there came a loud wailing from the shadows. "Shit," Jacob cursed, snatching up a burning brand from the fire. They were stalking in the darkness. He found the weasel-faced man crawling on his belly, leaving a thick trail of blood in the sand. To the sound of Jacob's approach, he flopped over on his back, his hands desperately trying to hold on to his steaming guts. "Please, mister," he sobbed, blood frothing on his lips. "Please don't kill me." Jacob took a look at the grisly wound. "Reckon I already killed you, partner. Best to ease you off on your way." "Wait!" the man screamed. I gotta get right with God first." "All right, friend," Jacob said sourly. "Make it quick. I haven't got all night." The man closed his eyes and began to mumble a quick prayer. Then, when he hit Amen, Jacob pulled the trigger and walked away. A few minutes later, he was sound asleep. In the distance, a coyote howled, and cold stars shone down with an idiot indifference. Apart from that brief interlude, the rest of the journey was blessedly free of trouble. Jacob spent the day reading from his Bible and letting his God-struck horse lead the way. It was on the fourth day, just as they crested a large hill, that Jacob heard the sound of voices raised in anger. Stowing his Bible, he urged the big mare forward until he could see more clearly into the valley below. There was a town nestled in the valley, one of those border towns, all squat white buildings and straw-covered streets. But it was not the town that drew Jacob's attention. There was a small cemetery and the men arguing just outside its leaning gates. "Get on," he said, nudging his horse forward. "Let's go see what the commotion's all about." Just as Jacob drew closer, he saw that there were 5 people in it. 3 men stood stoically outside the cemetery. The one in the middle seemed to be some kind of preacher. The 2 by his side, burly-looking cowpokes, both heavily armed. "You ain't burying your bastard in here," the preacher cursed at the 2 others. A man and a woman, both shabbily dressed. The woman held a small bundle clasped tightly in her chest and was openly weeping, great tears running tracks down her grimy face. The man with her was tall, with jet black hair tightly braided down his back. He wore a buckskin jacket, which hung loosely on his skinny frame. "Morning," Jacob said, reining in his horse before him. "What seems to be the problem?" "Be about your business," the preacher hissed at him. "I reckon not," Jacob said, easing himself off his saddle. "You heard the Reverend," one of the other men said, cocking his rifle. "Be on your way, stranger." Jacob ignored him, his eyes drifting into the Reverend. The silence drew out until at last, with an irritable sigh, the Reverend spoke up. "These 2, he said, nodding towards the now silent couple, "want to bury their bastard child in the town cemetery, and I ain't having it." "Oh," Jacob said. "And why is that?" "Are you goddamn blind?" the Reverend cursed. "Look at him. He's a heathen savage if ever I saw one. She is an inbred hillbilly child from the mountains. Their bastard wasn't even baptized. No way they're burying their offspring with the rest of these good Christian folks." "And what do you have to say about all this?" Jacob said, turning towards the tall, swarthy-looking man. "These lands once belonged to my people," he replied in a deep, rumbling voice. "That was before the white man stole it from us. The ground here is sacred. My ancestors still walk in these places, and I would rest my boy amongst them." Jacob nodded and turned to the girl. "That your boy, ma'am?" he said, nodding at the small bundle she held tight to her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice hitching. "His name is Solomon." Gently, she removed the burial shroud from the boy's face, revealing the delicate features within. "Good-looking boy, ma'am," Jacob said, tipping his hat solemnly. "Looks like you both done yourselves proud." The girl smiled at that and covered the boy back up, rocking him gently back and forth. Sighing, Jacob turned back to the enraged Reverend and threw back his dusty coat, revealing the gleaming pistols beneath. "Let him pass," he said, spitting into the dirt by the Reverend's feet. "Looks like they got themselves some burying to do." "Oh, screw this," the man to Jacob's right growled, raising his rifle. Jacob drew his gun in almost supernatural speed. A shot rang out and the man screamed, dropping his rifle, 2 of his 5 fingers missing. The other man to Jacob's left let out a cry and fumbled for his gun, but Jacob closed the distance between them in 2 angry strides. The smoking barrel pressed hard against the other man's forehead. "I set the mark of Cain upon you," he said, grinding the hot barrel against the man's flesh. "Now take your partner, get your faces into the wind." He drew the hammer back. "I don't tell you twice." With a cry, the man turned and fled, grabbing up his bleeding partner as they headed back towards town. You can't do that," the shocked Reverend blustered, but Jacob had already seized the man by the collar. "These folks are burying their boy in this here boneyard." "But they ain't no Christians." "It's rich coming from you," Jacob grated, pulling the man forward until their noses were almost touching. "Now you listen good. That boy is being buried here now, today. I don't give a monkey's fuck if they ain't Christian. Hell, I don't care if the devil shot them both out of his asshole. The boy is being buried, and you're gonna help." He pushed him roughly away. "Call it a penance. Now grab yourself a shovel, Reverend. If you ain't back here in less than a minute, I'll hunt you down and shoot you for the mangy dog you are." The Reverend looked into Jacob's face and turned tail, heading for a nearby tool shed. Jacob took out an old, tarnished pocket watch from his jacket and began to watch the seconds tick by intently. "You wouldn't really do it, would you?" the swarthy-looking man asked. "Mister," Jacob replied, "I have just about killed everything that walks, runs, or shits upon the face of the earth, at one time or another. One false reverend don't make a lick of difference to me." The big man nodded at this and held out his hand. "My name is Callion. This is my wife, Kate." "Pleasure," Jacob said, shaking the man's hand. "My name's Jacob Masterson." Just then the Reverend returned, puffing and panting, a shovel and a pick thrown over one narrow shoulder. Smiling, Jacob snapped his watch shut. "Well, look at that. With a full 15 seconds left to spare. Now," he said, rapping the barrel of his gun none too gently against the Reverend's ear, "let's find a place to bury this boy." The place ended up being a weed-strewn corner of the cemetery, next to a crumbling wall, far away from the rest of the leading markers. "This the best you can do, is it?" Jacob asked, eyeing the squirming Reverend angrily. "It is of no matter," Callion interrupted. "The ground here is sacred, and my boy will walk with those who have gone before him." "Okay," Jacob replied. "Looks like you have yourself some digging to do, Reverend." "No," Callion said quickly, snatching up the spade. "It is I who must dig his grave and place the stones upon it." "Okay," Jacob said, "but the good Reverend here is eager to help. Now go find these folks a goodish pile of rocks and be goddamn quick about it." The whole thing took just over 2 hours. When the last stone was laid, Callion sang songs and muttered prayers in musical language Jacob couldn't understand, his silent wife by his side. When he had finished, they both thanked Jacob profusely for his help, then walked away, leaving only Jacob and the Reverend behind. "Let's take a walk," Jacob said, heading for his horse, before mounting up and looking down at the other man. "Now listen good, Reverend. The God I believe in don't give no mind to the color of a man's skin, nor does he care what name a people care to give him. That's what's in a man's heart that matters, and your heart filled with hate. Hell, that savage, as you called him, makes 10 of you false priests. I'm leaving now. I may have cause to come back this way, maybe a week from now. maybe a month, even a year. I promise you this. If that boy's grave has been disturbed in any way, if I find a rock that's out of place, I'll plant you in the ground right beside him. Tell me you're hearing me. Yes, the Reverend stammered. No one will touch it. I give you my word. Your word ain't worth a fart in the wind, Jacob said, nudging the mare forward. But I'll take it anyway. That said, he rode away, heading towards town. Jacob, however, didn't get very far. He rode through town, right to the very outskirts, lost in his own thoughts when his horse suddenly stopped dead, almost throwing him from the saddle. What in God's name are you doing? Jacob asked the now silent horse. Come on, get where we're going, he said, pulling on the reins. Where the horse only tossed her head, pawing at the ground. Now there was a growing dread swirling in the pit of Jacob's stomach. Here? He said, exasperated. This is the place you've been taking me all along? This place where we're already made such good friends? Oh, shit, he said, clambering from his saddle. Could have warned me. Jacob grabbed up his rifle, strapping it across his back before lighting up a smoke as he really looked down at the town for the first time. The place was like any other border town he'd frequented before. All small, flaking white buildings with timber roofs. The road was nothing more than hand-packed sand. And the people, for the most part, were a mix of Mexicans and white Europeans. From across the dust-covered road came the ragtag sound of a piano, the deep roar of